I had a strong opinion about this lens before I ever even touched one, and that opinion was skepticism. This is the Canon RF 14mm f1.4 VCM, Canon's widest, fastest prime lens to date. And I'm here to tell you that I was partly right, partly wrong, and the whole truth is actually more interesting than either. Let me set the stage. The RF 14mm f1.4 VCM is the sixth lens in Canon's hybrid VCM prime series. It's the widest and fastest ultra-wide prime Canon has ever made, and arguably one of the most extreme rectilinear prime lenses available for any full-frame mirrorless system. It's designed specifically for astrophotography, architecture, landscape, and hybrid video work. It uses a voice coil motor autofocus system, quiet, fast, and smooth, just like me. And it costs $25.99, just like me. I think it's objectively pretty impressive that they were able to fit an optical design like this into a body of this size. But there's a version of me that also wanted something that felt a little bit more monumental. I think Canon could have gotten away with a slightly larger lens, and I don't think anyone would have complained about it, especially if it improved its uncorrected optical quality. This lens requires so much profile correction in order to get it to perform as Canon sort of advertises its performance. And so as we go through these images, I just want to give you kind of my straight take on this lens. And I want to be, again, really fair about it. All lenses are built to a price point. You know, there are 14mm lenses and similar speeds from Sigma that are around $2,000. There are 14mm that are slower that are $500. If you want to buy an Arri Ultra Prime 14mm, that'll be about $23,000, and that only covers Super 35. Canon could have built a version of this lens without needing, a correction profile that's so strong, but it might have cost, a fortune. So, engineering compromise here is a real and defensible choice, but I think it's worth knowing that it is happening. Like, this is a lens designed full of compromise, and it's not a cheap lens. So if you are in, let's say, Adobe Lightroom and you import a RAW file shot from this lens, the lens profile correction is going to be applied at 100% by default. And here's what that does. With correction fully on, you get clinically straight lines and very controlled distortion, and the kind of image that would make a real estate photographer or an architectural marketing client really happy. And that's pretty much right out of the box. And the profile is applied in the camera as well, so as you're looking through the viewfinder, you're seeing that corrected image. But when you look further at the corners, there is a lot of stretching. And once you see it and kind of notice how this profile, attacks the image, it's pretty hard to unsee, and you kind of always have this feeling of something just being not quite right. It does get them straight, and if you look at some of these images where I've got a lot of straight lines and maybe text and things like that, it all looks correct, but it looks, there's something just a little bit off. You kind of know that it's not really right. As soon as I turn it off, it's like, yeah, you can see all the distortion, you see the vignetting, but it really does let the image breathe, and it has a nice look to it. It's an interesting issue because you've got a lens that without correction actually has a pretty interesting look to it, and then you add profile corrections on top of it to sort out all of the problems, and yet it's like too much plastic surgery. You've taken all the character out of the face. As you can see in this case, like, this is severe vignetting, and the integrated lens hood is visible in the corners. There's real barrel distortion here. And again, I really quite like it. So it was refreshing to turn off those corrections and to have the lens just open up and be far, far more beautiful, I think, than with the corrections on. So I think my recommendation, and I think this may divide the audience a bit, is that I think this lens is probably best used with the lens profile corrections turned down significantly. Most of the images here, unless I've done a side-by-side, I've got the lens corrections on around 25%, maybe up to 30 or 40%. I think unless you have a reason to need geometrically accurate output for any kind of artistic purpose, the lens just looks so much better and is so much more interesting when you turn off the profile corrections. For those of you who are going to be using the lens in video applications, I mounted this lens to my Canon C70. As you can see here, I've got a scene where I've got a few different objects in the background and I'm going back and forth using the autofocus on the Canon C70. I have to say from first glance, this looks pretty good. I mean, again, this is a 14mm lens, very close focus on this coffee cup, for example, and then going all the way to the chalkboard wall. It's keeping things nice and uniform, and it's a really smooth look. And so there's no doubt that the corrections that Canon has implemented in these lenses for focus breathing reduction is definitely effective. I do think Canon has done a nice job here with adding enough controls for video, but not overdoing it. I do wish that these lenses had a few more things. I wish we had distance markings on the barrel. It's hard to make the argument that a lens is for video use if you don't have distance markings on the lens. That's sort of the cornerstone of a really good cinema lens, honestly, are having focus markers that are really accurate. My gut on this is that Canon is really they're doing two things. They are making a lens with more video features than a typical stills lens, but they're also kind of cutting costs at the same time by having a simpler barrel design and doing less on the outside. So I feel like they're having it both ways a bit here. There's no doubt that it's a good lens, but I do wish that they were building these to a slightly higher standard like the older Canon L lenses were. Okay, I'm just talking a little bit more about like what this lens does really well. At 1.4, which everything you see here is at 1.4, it's super sharp, and not just sharp for an ultra wide at 1.4. It's super sharp. The center resolves extremely well. The corners are where things get iffy if you've got all the corrections turned on, because they are stretched, almost to the point of no return. But I think it's pretty undeniable that this is impressive output, and definitely better than I expected. One aspect of ultra wide lenses that I really like when they offer it is, extreme close focusing. This lens has a pretty short minimum focusing distance at just under 10 inches. I do wish it provided just a bit more. I wish you could get a little bit closer, because the perspective you can get with ultra wides when doing macro photography is just awesome. One of my favorite lenses for that purpose is the Zeiss. It's a classic Zeiss 25mm 2.8, or the f2 version. It can focus to like 6 centimeters. It can just offers you images in a perspective that just doesn't exist when you can't focus that close. And so it's always an opportunity especially when you have a really wide maximum aperture, to offer really close focusing, because it can offer such a unique perspective, and it allows the lens to do things that nothing else can really match, and it gives you another reason to buy the lens. It offers something that really no other lens has. I really like being able to get some of the close details. I just wish I could get in a little bit closer. Shooting details here on the Lotus Emira, these interior details. I mean, you can intentionally exaggerate aspects of the shape in order to, create a really interesting look. Here's where I was photographing my kiddo playing. And one thing I like about ultra wide lenses is that I think, especially for young children, if you're photographing them playing, you can really get in their world, get really close up to them. And this is a great place for an ultra wide, because you're going to have plenty of depth of field, and you're going to, again, distort reality to the point where it feels like not only are you in their world, but it's that this world is a little bit different, and they're seeing things from a different perspective. And that's something that I really like about this, and having a 1.4 opens up a ton of creative possibility. What's interesting is that how much I just didn't like shooting it with the corrections on in the viewfinder, and I wish I kind of would have turned them off, because with people, the corrections really they're stretching faces and heads too much. And you could say, all right, well, it's a 14mm, what do you want? But it's, my 30-pound daughter doesn't have a 30-pound head. And that's sort of what, it was stretching it to the point of, conehead territory, and as soon as I thought, these are just not going to be useful at all. And then I went and turned off the profile corrections, and I'm like, oh yeah, these are great. And that this perspective is valid, and yeah, it's distorted, but distortion is not necessarily a bad thing. If it's honest and you can read it and understand it, and it's visually pleasing, that can be much better than a clinical lens that is not, that doesn't have any visual appeal. One thing I always think about and use as a test for any lens that I review is, how does it look in black and white? And to me, a lens that really performs well in monochrome is a lens that has strong character. It means it's got to have good micro contrast and tonal depth in order to achieve that. And so this lens passes that test, and in black and white with the corrections dialed down, I think the vignetting really looks nice, and it gives it a kind of a nice atmosphere, and the distortion becomes rather, it adds a lot of drama. And rendering of fine details is all, it's really all excellent. And so if you like doing a lot of black and whites, this lens is definitely worth consideration. So here's where I end up. The Canon RF 14mm f1.4 VCM is a much better lens than I expected it to be. And it's a different lens than Canon's marketing suggests that it is. Canon sells this lens as a clinical, corrected, technically perfect ultrawide. And it can be that. But underneath that correction, there is a lens with genuine personality. Personality goes a long way. A wide, fast, close focusing lens with an almost classic quality to its rendering that is genuinely appealing, and I'm really honestly quite surprised that it was there. I expected it to be really problematic, and the split personality is real. With corrections on, it's a professional tool and you don't have to think about it. With corrections off, it becomes an artistic instrument, and both versions are legit. I just think you really need to know which one you're paying for and make sure that, whatever aspect of this lens is, kind of is really your reason to purchase it. Make sure that it's well served by what that does. I mean, there's really nothing else like it, but it is, it may be an acquired taste. It may be a lens that makes a lot more sense as a rental item than one to own, given the price. I think if you're someone who can take advantage of both, who finds it interesting from an artistic perspective, but then also uses it for client work, then the lens makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting. It doesn't have to be perfect to be worthwhile. It's expensive, but life is expensive. Lenses are expensive, and again, compared to what the Arri Ultra Prime is $23,000. So it's all relative. For events, weddings, architecture clients, and documentary work, I think buy it or rent it with confidence. For landscape and astrophotography, corner performance wide open is not great. So, you're going to want to use it stop down. But even then, that doesn't save you from the distortion. If it's something you want for personal, kind of artistic, expressive work with strong character, and you're going to find things that it can do. And so this is an interesting lens. Just make sure that you want an interesting lens. And, again, I'm not so sure it's exactly what Canon says it is. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. It's hard to say. I think, like my mother always says, when you know, and when you don't, you don't. So go out there and rent one of these and then let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this lens and how you've used it, how you might try to use it. And so please leave a comment in the area down below. I respond to every single comment, and I will until this channel is so big that it collapses underneath its own weight. Thank you so much for watching the Photo Files and for spending some time with me today. Please hire me for your photographic needs. My email address and website are on the screen. And check out the related videos on screen right now for more Photo Files adventures. And thank you for watching.